today I'm going to talk about the art of research storytelling. And I think an important aspect here is to remember that writing about research is about telling the story of that research. I think this is an overlooked quality to writing. We often think of it as something purely academic, very dry. But in fact, the elements of storytelling are very much what makes an interesting, engaging, and worthwhile research paper. And I think those elements of storytelling can also guide you to become a better researcher by following a few simple rules. So let's talk about the 5 basic elements of story. And you've probably heard of these before: character, setting, plot, conflict, theme. Many of you probably know more about these than I do, but these are the things that you'll find in any story, whether a short story or a novel. And really these can be broken down into who, the character is who is doing it, the setting, which is where it's occurring, the plot is how it unfolds, how the story unfolds, the conflict is why you're there, there's some sort of antagonism, some sort of thing that needs to be resolved, and then the theme is what it's all about. And these actually will tie into your research paper. Your research paper should answer these same types of questions. So this is one take, this is my take on how these things map out. In terms of the character, the who, this is really about your participants, right? You need to tell who was involved in the study. The setting, well, I'm not sure this is a full mapping. It's certainly part of your methods section, but it's the apparatus or materials. It's all the details that you need to tell what was involved in the study, how the participants, what environment they were in. There's the plot, the how, which is really your procedure, again, part of your methods section. The conflict is the why, the introduction, and the results. And think of this as your introduction is your backstory, which is the previous research. And then you're introducing what question is unanswered. That's your central tension, this unanswered question. And in terms of the results, that's the answer to the question. So this is your conflict resolution. Your paper is about a conflict, which is an unanswered research question, and you're resolving that with your results. And then finally, the theme, the what, this you really bring about in your discussion. You need to tell what it was all about, why it mattered. So those are the elements, but how do you tell this story effectively? And I can't necessarily help you become a better storyteller, but I think you all know a thing or two about stories and enjoy them. So think of this as some hints for you. Many of you are familiar with Orson Scott Card, probably most famous for Ender's Game, but an LDS author of note in the science fiction and fantasy world. And he is also a professor of creative writing. And he has defined 4 types of story structures. Others have mentioned this before, but I think he succinctly brought this together. And these 4 are milieu, idea, character, and event stories. Let's talk about these. The milieu story, milieu is just another word for environment, and a milieu story is one centered around the environment in which it takes place. So think a travelogue or science fiction or fantasy, the environment that they're in, and that becomes a central focus. The central conflict is this environment. There's something about it that doesn't set well with the characters. And the character comes into this environment and grows in the process. They grow either to love the environment or to escape it. Then we have an idea story. An idea story is about discovering new information. It begins with a question. It ends when the question is answered. The central conflict is this unanswered question. Think about mysteries as an example of this. The whodunit is really about the question, who did it, who committed the murder, classically. And there's also a genre called speculative fiction that goes into these types of ideas. 2001 is a great example of speculative fiction. Then we have the character story, and this is about the transformation of the central character. The emphasis is on the change or growth in the character. The central conflict is about the character not being happy in some way and needing to change those circumstances. And so think of this as the coming of age stories or romance novels. A lot of young adult fiction is about the character evolving or growing. And finally, we have the event story. And the event story is when something happens to change the natural order of things. So there's a central conflict of chaos through this change, which is resolved by reestablishing the old order or bringing about a new order. And think of fantasy and science fiction and also the classic Odysseys as examples of this. One of the things I actually love about the Book of Mormon is it encompasses all 4 of these types of story structures. If that had been written by a single author, you typically wouldn't jump around to these different types of stories. But you think about the idea story, think about some of the central ideas that we learn about the gospel, think about the character story, the development of Ammon, for example. Think of the many events that happen, think of the new environment of the new world. All of these elements are present in wonderful ways in different types of stories that we see encompassed within the Book of Mormon. So which one do you think represents a research paper the best? I believe the idea story really encompasses this, and again, it's about asking a question and answering it, and that's what you're trying to do in your research paper. You have found an unanswered question, an unanswered research question, and you're going to solve it. You're going to tell us what the answer is to that. That is a beautiful mystery solved, and it should be a real page turner, if you ask me. So, a couple final tips. Do please tell who, where, why, what, and how. And as you're writing your research proposal, think of those elements, go back, double check, make sure that you're covering all of those elements. Do resolve the central conflict of an unanswered question. Make sure your research proposal gets there and provides a method by which you'll solve that question. And you can also speculate on what the answers might be. And do be excited about the story you're telling. You're investing a lot of time in this, answering this question this semester, and please try to convey that as well. Your excitement will be contagious, and that's really what will make this the page turn, what will make it good storytelling. And finally, a few don'ts. A lot of storytelling is about fiction. Please don't write fiction for your research. Never write fiction for your research. That's just one of our ethical rules. And maybe something a little less obvious, don't sensationalize your writing to make it a more interesting story. This is High Council Sunday. High Councilman or General Conference, you don't necessarily need animated delivery. Focus on the message. The message is what makes a good story, not necessarily your use of exceptional writing, words, descriptions, and those types of things. I hope this is helpful. I realize it may seem a bit of an abstraction to writing your research paper, but if you think of your research as a form of storytelling, as something where you want to engage, excite the reader, I think you'll do a much better job as you craft your papers. Good luck, and we'll see you online.